Terrifying super bears and artificial intelligence that can really tell. I tell you what, we've really got our work cut out for us. Shall we get started?
Everything you need to easily pass English ATAR. English ATAR made simple. Powered by Saints Coaching.
Hello. What does a captivating introduction of a persuasive speech look like? As we can see on the title slide, that is what we're looking at in this lesson. We'll discuss two introductions, one for each of the two introductions that we looked at in the previous lesson. It goes without saying that the three lessons previous to this one are essential pre-watching, as are their related activities. Those three lessons are, firstly, intro to module 5. Secondly, how to structure your response to a persuasive composing section. And thirdly, how to plan your response to a persuasive composing section question. As the saying goes, we're not here to have intercourse with spiders. Let's just get into it. Lesson objectives. First part of the lesson, we'll recap the structure of the title. Then we'll recap the structure of the introduction, aka the top funnel. From there, we'll analyze example 1, then analyze example 2, and then outline a simple summary. A relatively quick lesson. What is the structure of the title? It has three components, and they are, firstly, the actual title itself. Remember that the title should be short and intriguing, and you can make the title short and intriguing through the use of alliteration or a pun. The next element in the title is the subtitle. The subtitle just gives additional information about the contents of your speech. The third and final element is the byline. The byline just provides some contextual information, and that contextual information is broken up into 4 parts. The first part of the byline should be the speaker's name. The second part of the byline should state the speaker's occupation. The third part should state the date the speech was delivered. And the fourth part should refer to the context of delivery, which is really getting at who the audience is and where the speech was delivered. An acronym for these three elements is TSB, but that doesn't really have much flavor, much character. So let's use terrifying super bear instead. That's our recap for the title. Let's do the same thing for the structure of the introduction. This is what the bear top funnel looks like, and this is what she looks like with the elements. The first element is the activate. This element is 1 to 3 sentences that capture the audience's attention and relate to the overarching topic of your speech. Next up, we've got the introduce element. This is where you should introduce yourself, outline your qualifications or experience that relates to what you're talking about, and then say something that establishes some commonality with the audience. From there, we have the next element, the contextualize. This is where you outline the overarching topic and emphasize how and why that topic is relevant to your audience. Next up, we have the reasons element. This is where you should highlight the 3 main reasons that support your overarching argument. Speaking of your overarching argument, we've got the 5th and final element of our introduction, which is the thesis. The thesis is just a concise statement that highlights what your overarching argument is. And don't forget, the theme of this entire introduction is ethos. We learned that ethos is one of 4 categories of rhetoric that we're learning in order to help us write a great persuasive speech. Ethos involves the speaker appealing to the authority or credibility of himself, herself, or themselves. Our acronym for these 5 elements are AICRT. It's also a bit bland, so let's go with artificial intelligence can really tell instead. That's our recap of the title and the introduction. Let's turn to example number 1. Here's our question for example number 1. I don't think you quite understand the ramifications of this decision. Incorporate this statement into a persuasive text for a resistant audience. And here is a quick recap of step 5 of the planning steps that we addressed in the previous lesson. In step 5 of the planning steps, we outline for the introduction what the activate and thesis is. For the first body paragraph, what our first reason is and what our example that we'll use to back that reason up is. We do the same thing for the second body paragraph. And then in the third and final body paragraph, we also map out what our counter argument will be, then our third reason, and then the example that backs that third reason up. Finally, for the conclusion, we state what our CTA will be or our call to action will be. Pause the video now and have a read of the following underlined elements. I'd like you to consider how those 5 elements manifest in the following example introduction. Here's the original version of the title and the introduction. And here is the deconstructed version of the title and introduction. Starting with the title element of the title, which is digital boundaries. Moving on to the subtitle element of the title, why you need them and how they liberate you. Last but not least, we have the byline and its 4 components. Speech delivered by Leonard Sampson, co-founder of DB Inc. on 9 June 2022 to Year 11 and Year 12 students at Saints College. That's the complete title. Here is the introduction. Here is the activate. It's a cold, wintry Thursday night. You're at your desk working on an English presentation due tomorrow, which you've just started. You're reading the task outline and, Janine just sent me a TikTok. 15 minutes later. Okay, you're back to the task outline. You read that the assessment is an oral presentation meant to persuade a resistant audience of, Nathan sent me Dua's latest song. 5 minutes later. Right, so the presentation must persuade a resistant audience that climate change is real, and to get full marks, you need to... A show of hands, how many of you can relate to this situation? Moving on to the next element, the introduce element. Good afternoon, Year 11s and 12s. My name is Leonard Sampson, you can call me Len, and I'm the co-founder of DB Inc. I've spent the last 10 years traveling the world and speaking to a variety of organizations and corporations about this thing I call digital boundaries, or DB for short. I coined the term during my final years at university when I kept finding myself in a situation not dissimilar to the one that I described just a moment ago. I had tutorials to prepare for, lectures to watch, and assignments to submit, but with social media apps like Instagram and Snapchat on the rise back then, I found it super difficult to get anything done. Moving on to the contextualize. Long story short, I created a bunch of strategies, collectively called digital boundaries, which helped me get done what I needed to get done. And that brings me to your school today. Your heads of year, Ms. Branson and Mr. Edison, have asked me to discuss digital boundaries with you. By the end of my talk, you'll be faced with a decision to ignore everything I've said or to establish digital boundaries in your life. Element number 4 is the reasons element. If you decide to ignore what I've said, 3 main things will occur. Your attention span will continue to decrease, you'll lose hours each day, and you'll exacerbate anxious feelings. Moving on to the final element, the thesis. I don't think you quite understand the ramifications of this decision. So, my talk today is going to delve a bit further into those 3 things in the hope of convincing you that you need to implement digital boundaries in your life, not because you necessarily want to, but because there will come a time, if it hasn't already, when you'll need to. That's the deconstructed version of the title and the introduction. Let's discuss some comments in relation to them. Starting with the title element of the title. Digital boundaries is short and intriguing. You can get the gist of what the phrase means, but you need to read further, listen to the speech, to find out more. Then we have the subtitle. Why you need them refers to the resistant audience part of the question. The word need suggests that it doesn't matter if the audience is resistant. If they need something, they'll get it regardless of whether they are resistant to it. Then the second part of the subtitle is how they liberate you. This part is intriguing. Who doesn't want to be liberated? And it also makes me wonder what I am being liberated from. Finally, we have the byline. This byline succinctly addresses those 4 components of this element. The first being the speaker's name, the second being the speaker's occupation, the third being the date the speech is delivered, and the fourth being the context of delivery, which refers to the audience and where the speech was delivered. Turning to the activate of the introduction. The audience is activated through the use of a hypothetical situation. This hypothetical situation is one I'm sure my audience could relate to in some capacity, so it engages them. The activate also uses onomatopoeia through the recurrent use of beep beep. Finally, it uses a rhetorical question. How many of you can relate to this situation? This directly addresses the question, and as I said a moment ago, it's a question I believe my audience really cares about, and if they care about it, they'll be engaged. They'll be activated. Ultimately, the activate captures the audience's attention by making them think, oh, this person understands what I'm going through. I'm going to listen to what they say. And that really gets at what the whole purpose of the activate is. It's to get the audience to think, this person gets it. Moving on to the introduce element. I greet the audience by saying, good afternoon, year 11s and 12s. Greeting the audience is a great way to tell the marker that you have composed a persuasive speech. You can call me Len is a subtle way of making me come across as a relatable, everyday person, as opposed to some professional corporate person who thinks he's better than the audience. Also, consider the use of diction in this part of the intro. Notice how I say things like, I found it super difficult to get anything done. Compare this to, I found it increasingly difficult to get anything done. The first option creates an informal voice, whereas the last option creates a formal voice. After the introduce, we've got the contextualize. Here I refer to the title of my text by providing a general explanation of digital boundaries. This is more of a side note, but I want to quickly touch on starting a sentence with the word and. Doing this in an essay in the responding section is a no-no, but the beauty of a speech, particularly one that has a relaxed voice, is that these grammatical conventions of not starting sentences with the word and don't need to strictly be followed. Then we've got the reference to your heads of year. Doing this makes the situational context of presenting this speech in a school gym more believable. And this is a great way of showing the marker that I understand how important context is in the composing section. Also note the use of polarization in the final part of the contextualize. Polarization is a rhetorical device found in the LFB that presents a situation as an either or set of circumstances. Either one thing happens or the other thing will happen. There's no in between. Here, I say the audience will be faced with a decision. Either they can ignore everything I've said or they can establish digital boundaries. You either do one or the other. Finally, this phrase, faced with a decision, acknowledges the word decision in the statement in the question. One of the easiest ways to tell the marker you're answering the question is to reuse parts of it in your response. Turning to the reasons element of the introduction. This part of my intro is one sentence that outlines the ramifications or consequences of ignoring what I say. Basically, I'm saying that there are three consequences of ignoring what I have to say, and what I have to say is my thesis, which is that the audience should establish digital boundaries. In this part of my intro, I'm saying the audience will experience three things if they don't establish digital boundaries, and those three things each represent a body paragraph in my persuasive speech. The first thing is your attention span will continue to decrease. The next thing is you'll lose hours each day, and the final thing is you'll exacerbate or worsen anxious feelings. Reason 1, BP1. Reason 2, BP2. Reason 3, BP3. Finally, we have the thesis. The statement in the question is actually blended into the thesis element of this introduction. It's blended because in the previous two sentences, I've outlined what this decision is, to ignore everything I've said or establish digital boundaries, and I've highlighted the ramifications of making the wrong decision. Hopefully you can see a logical sequence in the way these sentences are structured. Remember, the question requires me to incorporate this statement, which means I must repeat it in my persuasive speech verbatim, word for word. In order for me to incorporate this effectively, firstly, I outline what the decision is. Secondly, I outline what the ramifications are. Then I directly incorporate the statement. I don't think you quite understand the ramifications of this decision. This part of my thesis, in the hope of convincing you that you need to implement digital boundaries in your life, is my overarching argument, my thesis. That's example number 1. Let's take a look at example number 2. Our question, and this is how change happens. One gesture, one person, one moment at a time. Incorporate this quote in a persuasive text that uses language features to target a specific audience. Here is step 5 of the planning steps, a recap of that step from the previous lesson. Like we did in the previous example, pause the video now and focus on the underlined elements. One final time for this lesson, take note of how those 5 elements manifest in the following example. Here's the original version of the title and the intro. Here's the deconstructed version, starting with our title and specifically the title element of the title. ADHD and a second brain. Moving on to the subtitle. How to master your superpower. And here is the byline. Speech delivered by Diego Dente, CEO of Undistracted, on 30 February 2022 to second-year university students with ADHD at UWA's Octagon Lecture Theatre. Cannot say I miss that place very much. Here's the activate for this introduction. It's 8:45 a.m. on Sunday and you're smashing a bowl of Weet-Bix. I do 9. You're excited for a busy day consisting of binge watching the latest season of Stranger Things. Next minute, your best mate Tim texts you, "I'll be there in 15 minutes. You wonder to yourself, beware, was he meant to send that to someone else? Oh shit. We're meant to be getting brekkie in 15 minutes at Someday Cafe. I forgot. For those of us with ADHD, this situation is all too familiar. Here's the introduce element. Good morning, everyone. My name is Diego Dente, and I'm the CEO of Undistracted, a company that has a mission to help people with ADHD manage their lives by utilizing this thing called a second brain. I created the second brain because I was sick and tired of my first brain not remembering stuff. This is the contextualize element. In a nutshell, a second brain is a system for capturing and organizing all sorts of information, such as a reminder to pay the power bill or calendar entry that you've got brekkie with Tim on Sunday morning. If properly established and implemented, a second brain will help you stay on top of your uni assignments, social commitments, and just about everything else in between. This is the reasoned element. Today, I'm going to discuss how we're bombarded with information, some misconceptions about our actual brains, and one of the main benefits of using a second brain. Finally, the thesis for this introduction. Today, I'm going to convince you that creating a second brain is in your best interests and is the first step to transforming your ADHD from a burden into a superpower. That's the deconstructed version of the title and the intro. Let's discuss some comments. Here's the title of the title. This part of it immediately targets people who are interested in or have ADHD. And this phrase, second brain, intrigues the audience. When you hear the phrase second brain, you can't help but wonder what it is. Turning to the subtitle element of the title. Referring to ADHD as a superpower is more attractive to my target audience than referring to ADHD as a disorder. Superpower implies that I'll refer to ADHD as something empowering rather than disempowering. The syntax or sentence structure of the title and subtitle suggests that a second brain is how you can master ADHD, your superpower. Finally, we have the byline. Speaker's name, speaker's occupation. The fact that the name of this company relates to the topic of ADHD is just a nice little touch that I'm sure the marker would appreciate. We have the date of delivery of the speech, and we have the context of delivery. The audience is second-year university students with ADHD, and the location is the Octagon Lecture Theatre. That's the title and its 3 elements. Let's check out the activate of the introduction. The following techniques are designed to capture the audience's attention. A sprinkle of humor, pop culture references such as binge watching the latest season of Stranger Things, and we've also got inclusive language, such as for those of us. This inclusive language empathizes with the audience by saying, I feel your pain. Turning to the introduce. Notice the use of alliteration in the speaker's name. Alliteration is a good one to use because it makes the name memorable. For example, Bilbo Baggins, J. Jonah Jameson, King Kong, and Lex Luthor. Also, consider the effect of diction, word choice on voice. For instance, here I say, I was sick and tired of my brain not remembering stuff. Compare that to my brain's inability to recall important information exasperated me. The first version makes the speaker come across as relatable. The second version makes the speaker come across as formal, proper, academic, and a bit douchey. This second version is better suited to a bunch of professors discussing their latest findings in neurobiology rather than a bunch of second-year uni students. Moving along, we've got the contextualize. Here I refer to the hypothetical situation that I mentioned in the activate, and notice how that situation in the activate about forgetting brekkie with Tim not only captivates the audience, but it's also quite representative of a typical struggle for someone with ADHD. And those struggles relate related to having ADHD is the so-called problem this speech addresses. I also clearly state how my speech can help the audience by referring to things that are important to them, such as staying on top of your uni assignments and social commitments. Because these things are important to the audience, they have a genuine reason to listen to my speech. Next, we've got the reasons element. In high school English, it's taboo to write, "In this essay, I will blank." Fun fact, if you want to go to university, depending on what you're studying, it's actually often encouraged to use that phrase in an essay. It certainly was for me in my law essays. Every single one of them in the introduction had the phrase, "In this paper, I will discuss XYZ." My law professors wanted me to be as clear as possible in telling them what the paper was going to discuss. For some reason, that's not a thing English teachers want us to do in high school. However, in a speech, there's nothing wrong with explicitly telling the audience what your main reasons are. This is because in the case of real-life speeches, the audience typically doesn't have access to a transcript in real time of the speech. Therefore, being crystal clear with your words is very important. Finally, we have the thesis. Convince you that creating a second brain is in your best interests. That is my thesis, which is my overarching argument. Transforming your ADHD from a burden into a superpower refers to the subtitle. Referring to words that appear in the title section of your speech in the actual speech makes it more cohesive. Instead of two separate elements, title, speech, it's one. Finished for this lesson after this simple summary. First part of this lesson, we looked at the structure of the title, mnemonic, terrifying, super bitter. The T stands for title. The title should be short and intriguing. Consider using alliteration or a pun to achieve those effects. The S stands for subtitle. The subtitle gives additional information about the context of the persuasive speech. The B stands for byline. This provides contextual information, speaker's name, occupation, date of delivery, context of delivery. Context of delivery refers to who the audience is, where the speech is given. Next section of the lesson, we recap the structure of the bottom funnel, the introduction. Our mnemonic, artificial intelligence can really tell. Theme, ethos, which involves the speaker appealing to the credibility or authority of himself, themself, herself. The A in the mnemonic stands for activate. The activate is 1 to 3 sentences that relate to the overarching topic and capture the audience's attention. The introduce is where you introduce yourself, outline your relevant qualifications or experience, and then say something that establishes some commonality with the audience. After that, we have contextualize. Contextualize is where you outline the overarching topic and emphasize how and why it's relevant to your audience. Then we have the reasons element. This is where you highlight the 3 reasons that support your overarching argument. Finally, you've got the thesis, which is a concise statement that highlights what your overarching argument is. With those recaps of the title and the introduction, we move to our discussion of example 1 and example 2. Here are some key takeaways from those examples in relation to each element of the title and the introduction. Starting with the title element of the title. In those 2 examples, we saw that a compelling title conveys the essence of the persuasive speech and piques the audience's curiosity. A compelling title is, firstly, very relevant to what the speech is about, and secondly, makes you curious. A key takeaway in relation to the subtitle, using the word you or your in the subtitle effectively engages the audience. It makes the audience feel like you are speaking directly at them individually. Then the byline element of the title. We've got 3 points. Firstly, using alliteration for your speaker's name, e.g. Diago Dente, makes them more memorable. Secondly, the context of delivery section of the byline is similar to the situation context you establish in step 3 of the planning steps. Thirdly, link the speaker's occupation to the topic of the speech. For example, Diago Dente was the CEO of Undistracted, a company that helps people develop strategies to manage their ADHD. The topic of the speech is mastering ADHD. That's some important stuff regarding the title and its 3 elements. Here's some important stuff regarding the introduction and its 5 elements. Starting with the activate. Firstly, the activate should make the audience think, oh, this person understands what I'm going through. I'll listen to what they have to say. Referring back to the activate throughout your response creates textual cohesion. Textual cohesion means that all the different parts of the text have common threads. They don't exist separately from one another in silos. Regarding the introduce element, greeting the audience is an effective way of telling the marker that you understand the conventions of the form, which is a speech, and that your response is directed at a particular audience. Understanding the conventions of the form just means you understand what is typically done in the form of a speech. You typically greet your audience at the beginning of a speech. Also, telling the audience they can refer to you by nickname makes you appear relatable. Final main point about the introduce, consider how subtle nuances in diction can influence the construction of voice. Consider how the words you use can influence the voice or personality that comes across to the audience. For instance, super difficult creates an informal voice, and increasingly difficult creates a formal voice. Turning to the contextualize. It's acceptable to adopt a more relaxed approach to the rules of grammar in a speech. Recall how we said that you can start a sentence with and if you've chosen to portray a casual voice. Another point about the contextualize, state the topic's relevance by referring to something that really matters to the audience. Example, stay on top of uni assignments, social commitments. These things matter to my audience of second year undergrad uni students who have ADHD. Second last element of the intro is the reasons element. For this one, we said you can explicitly state what you'll talk about in the reasons part of your introduction. Put differently, you can say in your speech, in this speech, I will talk to you about XYZ. It's all good for you to do that in a speech, unlike in an essay where it's taboo to write. In this essay, I will. Finally, the thesis. You got to make sure your thesis explicitly states what your overarching argument is. Make it easy for the marker to identify what you're arguing. I do that in the following example. Today, I'm going to convince you that creating a second brain is in your best interests. If a marker read that part of this sentence, they would know that is really my thesis. I'm making it easy for them to figure out I'm ticking the boxes of the key things that need to be in a persuasive speech. Finally, when a question requires you to incorporate a statement, in addition to repeating that statement verbatim or word for word, try to make its contents an integral part of your response. So if a question is asking me to incorporate the following statement, I don't think you're quite aware of the ramifications of this decision. Yes, it's important to directly incorporate that statement, but don't just incorporate it in your persuasive speech once and never refer to anything about that statement again. If you really want to impress the marker, incorporate the statement and make it an important part of your speech. In example 1, the ramifications of the decision literally form my 3 main reasons that I refer to in the body of my speech. We done. I hope you found it useful to see what the structure of an introduction looks like in practice. As always, the best way you can learn to actually use this structure yourself is to practice it. So be sure to go and complete the related activities for this lesson. They're a continuation of the activities you did for the previous lesson on planning. Remember to read the instructions carefully as the activities for this lesson are different depending on whether persuasive texts are your first, second, or third preference text type. All the best with that. Honestly, just try and have a little bit of fun with it, and I will see you in the next lesson on body paragraphs. Until then, keep it simple.